Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 105 today. And I am here with a very special guest, Chloe Cole. How are you doing today, Chloe?
I'm good. Thank you for asking. How are you?
What have you been up to today? Anything much?
Not really. I had a few other interviews today, and I've mostly just been at home, just hanging out with my family and relaxing.
Oh, that sounds awesome. What were the interviews you had about today with those people?
One was a news segment, and another was for a nonprofit group in Texas.
Hmm. And what were you talking to them about?
Mainly about my story and a little bit about just what I'm doing these days.
Mhm. Fair enough, Chloe. That's all good. So, Chloe, tell us about your background. You're a bit famous with detransitioning stuff. Tell us about your background.
Yeah, so I am somebody who transitioned medically and then detransitioned all while I was still a kid. Um, my gender transition took place between the ages of 12 to 16, and it started with socially transitioning and changing my name, and then eventually going on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones at the age of 13, and having a double mastectomy at 15 before detransitioning shortly afterward.
Mhm.
And for about the past year or so, I've just been talking online and talking to legislators about my own experiences transitioning as a child and against the practice of doing this to kids.
Wow, that's absolutely crazy. So, tell me about like questioning your identity. Like, what was the thing that like made you like want to change, your gender at such a young age? Because for a 12-year-old, it's 12 or 11, right? 12 or 11?
Yeah, roughly around that age. Yeah.
Like, like what would make, because when usually when a person is like 12 or 11, they would just want to focus on playing video games, on like being a child and stuff like that. What was the thing that really pressured you to become like this?
So my first real exposure to gender ideology was through social media and the internet, and it was actually through fandoms on things like certain video game series and comics and cartoons that I watched or read. And a lot of the users in those communities were identifying as LGBT or especially as transgender. And a lot of them would talk about like their outside of their posts about video games, they would talk about like their own personal experiences about how gender dysphoria felt and their desire to transition and the happiness that came with every milestone of transition that they went through. And just reading these people's posts, I wasn't really interacting with them directly, but I felt really connected to these people, and I really related to them in a lot of ways, both in my interests and my upbringing, and how I felt about myself, and especially having relating to myself as a girl growing up into a woman, and my body. Before I was before I was introduced to any of this, I started puberty at a fairly young age. I was around 8 or 9, and I was just going to my fourth grade year of elementary school. I don't know what the equivalent is in your country, but I was it was really quite a young age, and it was difficult for me having to deal with these rapid changes in my body and starting to have to wear bras and putting up with people making comments around, especially around my chest. And I became really conscious of my body from a very young age. And I would often compare myself to the women in my family, my older sisters, my mom, and even my female peers. And I just felt like I could never be pretty like them. And I often wondered what my worth was as a woman, because I wasn't particularly feminine either. Um, the older I got, the more tomboyish I started to get, and the more I wanted to associate with the boys. And I found it very difficult to relate to other girls in a lot of ways. I felt like I neither shared their interests nor feelings, nor I felt like I didn't even look like them. And I wondered just what good it would be for me to continue being a girl. I felt like at times that I would be better off as a boy. And upon learning that I didn't have to be a girl, that it was possible that despite being born as a daughter, perhaps I could be a son.
See what you mean by that. Wow. So all that peer pressure, that sense of belonging, it seems to me like you wanted a sense of belonging when you were younger, to belong in a group. And, especially when you go back to the tomboyish, I saw the interview you did with Tulsi Gabbard where you talked to her about how she also mentioned how she was a tomboy too, and how tomboys, just want to pretty much, be people who just want to have fun, people just want to be, and it's just such a shame, to see like a girl like you to be taken advantage of. So, you also, in one of your interviews, you also mentioned about a double mastectomy. Is that what it is?
Double mastectomy.
Yeah, double mastectomy. What's that about?
I had both my breasts removed.
Mhm. Can you explain that? How come? Why is that?
Yeah, it was a part of my gender transition, and one of the things that I noticed once I started looking at these these like transgender circles online, and especially the FTM circles, is that they really worship the medical aspect of things. And in the I would see like in these artworks that female to male individuals would make, they would almost like worship the scars from the double mastectomy procedure.
Oh my
And
god, it is awful, isn't it? It's absolute. Like this morning, Chloe, I was seeing some photos of like these kids, having their transgender, like having surgery and stuff like that.
mm,
And I heard that there was a doctor that was pretty much doing surgery on 12-year-old and 14-year-olds, and they're proud of it. And it's just like, and they tell kids that it's okay for them, to do this, that it will prevent them from committing suicide. And like, how on earth is this going to prevent a kid from committing suicide? Like, this doesn't help a kid. Like, and the long-term effects of these surgeries is bad. It affects your growth. It affects your puberty growth. It's just absolutely disgraceful to see that happening.
right. I mean, I wasn't suicidal until I started transitioning actually. But I I didn't start trying to hide my breasts until after I started medically transitioning actually, which is kind of unusual about my case. Most people they start using like either tape or bandages or devices called binders, which are basically like little compression devices that look like tank tops, and they have in the chest area they have like a compression garment to flatten the appearance of the breasts. And I didn't start using one until I was a few months on testosterone. And it wasn't until an incident in class where I had been sexually assaulted by a male classmate that I started feeling the need to really start hiding that part of my body.
How did everyone react to that? That groping thing that happened to you.
Yeah, I actually didn't really tell any adults about it because I thought it was gonna bring me more trouble. The kid had been bullying me for about a year, but I never really expected it to get that bad. And I thought that if I brought it up to like a school staff member of the office, that he would probably just like get a slap on the wrist for what he did to me, and he could come back to school and potentially hurt me or rape me. And I really didn't want to. It wasn't a battle that I wanted to fight. And I was trying to be a boy. I really thought that I was just another boy, and if I wanted to keep living this way, I had to just man up. I couldn't cry about it. I couldn't complain. I just had to live with it. And so, in downplaying my feelings about it and not dealing with them, it just festered. And I mean, the incident really reinforced an already existing fear I had of being targeted as a woman and being sexually assaulted. And I didn't want that to ever happen again. I didn't want anybody to know that I was actually biologically a woman, because to me that signified weakness, and I didn't want to be seen as weak. And on top of that, I really fell into the delusion that I was actually a boy, despite being biologically female. And I wanted my appearance to reflect that. And after a few years of using this binder, it was really quite uncomfortable, because I bought it from a reputable brand and it fit me well, but it was still very uncomfortable. It was still squeezing the upper area of my body, so much so that it actually deformed my ribs. And I
Oh
would
wow,
wear this thing
that's
every single
absolutely
day.
terrible.
I would wear it while working out, while swimming, while going on runs, and I went to school for about 8 hours a day, if not a bit longer, if I were staying with after school for whatever reason. And I got sick of wearing it, and I didn't want to. I wanted to be free of it. And so, about halfway into my sophomore year was when I started to think, well, this part of me isn't of any use to me, and I want to stop wearing this uncomfortable cage.
You're
I
still
just want to
wearing
look
it to
like the
this
other
day.
boys.
You're still wearing it to this day, are you?
No, I stopped having to wear it after I had the mastectomy, because there's nothing to compress there anymore.
Oh wow, that must have been an amazing feeling to get that off. So,
And it was.
we when you had like the double histamine thing, what is like the healing process of it, and what would you warn, all of these kids, like what would you warn people who are getting brainwashed, like what would you warn the parents whose kids are getting brainwashed into this, stuff where they're being told you should have surgery because if you don't you'll kill yourself, or it's okay for a kid to like 12 or 13-year-old to change their gender? What would you warn the parents or the kids, of the harmful effects of the surgery that you don't hear from the doctor or from the surgeon?
Yeah. The suicide myth is the exact same lie that they gave my parents. My my mom and dad weren't pushing me into transitioning or getting any of these treatments. In fact, they wanted the very opposite. They didn't care that I was dressing a different way, that I was presenting myself differently, but they were terrified upon learning that I wanted to start going down the medical route of things. They didn't want me to be making any decisions like that under the age of 18, when they knew I wouldn't really be able to understand the huge undertaking of it. And they didn't want me to make any permanent decisions at such a young age. But they were really coerced into it by doctors, because they were told, well, it's very rare actually for patients undergoing a gender transition to regret it. It happens in less than 1% of cases. And most kids know what they are from a very young age. So if you don't let your daughter transition, then it's very likely that she will kill herself. So you'll have to choose between having a dead cis daughter or a live trans son. And they were bought into it. They're terrified for me.
Oh wow, that's absolutely terrible. All
But this
those.
wasn't,
Mhm.
it wasn't true. I wasn't
Yeah.
suicidal until I was on these treatments. And the mastectomy, the problem with the testosterone and the mastectomy was that initially they did make me a lot happier. I Before I was put on the testosterone, for about a month, I went through a period of what could be described as an artificial menopause because of the puberty blockers that they put me on first, because they said to me, the endocrinologist said to me that in order to start the hormone therapy, they would have to clear out all the pre-existing production of sex hormones in my body, and to make way for the exogenous hormones. And I was informed of some of the side effects and of all the ones that I would experience on the blockers, but nothing they told me really could have prepared me for the experience
What
of
would
it.
what would you say out of all the side effects was the most horrific side effect?
It's, I mean, really, it's like comparing apples to oranges because it was all awful. I was very lethargic because of the lack of sex hormones in my body, and it made it so that I was actually a little bit depressed even during that period of time, and it made it very hard to focus on things in my day to day life. And on top of that, I was experiencing some serious hot flashes accompanied by itching all over my body. And I was going through this at 13, when this is something that women usually start to experience as soon as their 40s or as late as their 60s.
Wow, that's insane
And
for a
so
13-year-old to be experiencing that. That's absolutely insane.
and so once I started on the testosterone, I finally had sex hormones back in my body. I finally had my energy back. I felt confident. I had all the cognitive effects of testosterone, and so I felt great. It felt amazing. And there was also that euphoria of starting this major treatment and reaching this huge milestone. And by this point in time, I had started to make friends online with people who they call themselves either allies or they also identified as trans, and they celebrated this. They told me that they were really happy for me, that they were proud of me, and that they looked up to me even. And the physical effects started to come in um, no later than roughly 2 to 3 weeks. The first effect that came was my voice dropping. It happened very rapidly, and it was very dramatic. And people at school started to notice it right away. And after that, in the next few months, my hair started to thicken slightly. My eyebrows got thicker. Um, I started to develop more muscle, and my fat redistribution started to change. And even the shape of my face was starting to become more angular, more masculine.
Mhm.
So it was a very powerful drug that I was on. But after a while, once I was in middle school at this time, so once I got into high school in my ninth grade year, by the time that I was 14, I already passed as a boy, and I looked just like any other member of the opposite sex at the time. I was pretty short, but that was pretty normal for a kid my age, but at the time, but I actually had a deeper voice than most of the boys my age at the time. And so nobody really, other than people who
Did
I
you
went
did you
to,
did you have like a deeper voice that you sound like an opera singer?
uh,
I was just doing that as a joke, just a joke.
yeah, but nobody really suspected anything. Some people that I went to elementary or middle school with knew, but it was to the point that even some of those people didn't even recognize me. They didn't know who I was. But I felt great because I passed. I I won, and I started to fit in with the boys. I was starting to form some really great friendships with the males my age, and it felt great to just be included in a group and to be seen as what I thought at the time to be my true self. But reality started to set in, and I was still attracted to to boys, but now I looked like I was one of them, and so I had a very skewed dating pool. And there were some girls my age who had crushes on me, but I really just didn't have any interest in them. And all my friends were starting to get into relationships, getting their first boyfriends and girlfriends, and I was always the third wheel. And I started to feel very lonely. And on top of that, the social role of being male was a lot more difficult than I had anticipated. I mean, I really didn't have any male figures that
So
really
you
told
did
me
like
about the
you didn't
hardships of being
have a lot
male
of
socially.
like role models. Like if you did have a role model then, what do you wish that role model would have told you at that stage in your life?
It's really difficult to determine whether anything that would have been said to me would have changed the outcome, because it's just hard to look back on the past and determine what could have been. But I just feel like this shouldn't have been allowed for me at all. I shouldn't have been to go on. I shouldn't have been allowed to go on these treatments at all, because it it destroyed my mental health. It really destroyed my sense of identity, and on top of that, it I mean, my body's still healing to this day. I've been off these treatments for almost 2 years, and it's still having some serious effects on my health. And part of that is because of how young I transitioned.
Yeah, which is not good at all. I really think they should not be putting kids on like hormone blockers in like a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, because what does a kid know when he's at like 12 or 13? Especially like when I saw an interview where you were, telling you how where you were telling, one of the interviewers how you were getting told, do you want to have kids? Do you want to have this? And what does a kid know at 13? It's like a lot of these, transgender, like a lot of these people performing these surgeries, the medical profession who are making money out of this whole disgusting industry, is like they're telling kids or something that, they seem to be brainwashing kids and saying to them that, yes, you do know what you want. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. It's just like this mental abuse that they're giving to kids, and it's just absolutely unacceptable. So, Chloe, what what would you say when you woke up, right, to this whole thing? What was, the transgender community's reaction to you, when you woke up and started to like expose the truth about the whole like, trans, like the whole, gender, just the whole gender, changing thing? And what was the reaction you got from them? And what is your opinion on like the detrans community?
So, up until the point that I had surgery, I had been pretty confident in my transition, and I didn't really have any negative feelings having to do with my transition specifically, despite it really seriously affecting other areas of my life. And it wasn't until in my second to last year of high school, when I was taking a class in psychology, and towards the end of the course, I was learning about like children and how their minds would develop, and about parenting, that I realized that I was having a part of me as an adult being taken away because of a decision that I was allowed to make as a child. I started to learn about the intricacies of parenting, and all the work that goes into raising a child in a family, and the importance of that. And it wasn't really anything that I had thought of before. I mean, I wondered a few times during my transition that, well, maybe I do want to have kids one day, but I'm sure that I could just like get some fertility treatment or freeze eggs down the line or get like a surrogate or something. But that was a very naive thought. It's really not that simple. But I also just wanted to have my own biological kids, and that wasn't something that I had really discovered up until that point. And it was very painful knowing that these treatments could have affected my ability to naturally mother kids one day. And now that my breasts were gone, I would never be able to breastfeed. I would never know. I wouldn't even have the option of just naturally feeding my children and using what God what God gave me.
Yeah,
And
you
that
know,
was very
mm, go ahead,
the
keep talking.
pain of
Sorry.
that was what took me out of transitioning. I couldn't live like that anymore. And so I it was a very reckless decision that I made without much support, but I decided to go cold turkey off of testosterone because I couldn't even stand looking at the vial or the needle anymore. I didn't want it in my body anymore. I hated what it represented. And at this point in time, COVID and the whole quarantine thing had already hit. So I was already pretty isolated, and a lot of my friendships from school had suffered, and I didn't really have much connection to anybody from school anymore. So a lot of my social interaction was pretty much restricted to online, and I had mostly online friends at that point. And so the internet and my personal social media was where I went to for just to talk about my pain. And I hope that somebody would understand and be sympathetic, and that I could reach out to somebody within the trans community. But pretty much immediately I was faced with a lot of hatred and opposition.
Yeah,
And I was
I
very
did.
shocked.
I remember when I was doing research on you a few days ago, and I remember like the backlash you were getting, and I thought it was absolutely outrageous. You know, some of the things people were saying to you, like it was like, why are they doing that to a young person like you? It was stupid.
It's I'd say it's mostly fear. A lot of the people who initially attacked me just for speaking about my experience, I noticed that a lot of them were very early in their transition. They were only socially transitioning, or they had been medically transitioning, but they didn't pass very well, and so they didn't really have the experience that I had. And seeing somebody who transitioned so young and got so far into a transition in seemingly the most optimal conditions, and yet still the transition still being a failure, and still going through the regret and having made a huge lifelong mistake, I think is pretty terrifying.
Yeah, that's true because when you make a decision like that, you're never going to get it back. Chloe,
So,
when
but there's also
you go ahead, yeah,
that little bit of cognitive dissonance, and that, like, you'll often hear from a lot of people in the trans community and from these activists that stories like mine never happen, that they're insignificant, that less than 1% of people detransition, and that it's almost never due to regret, and it's almost always because of social pressure. But I had all the support that I could possibly want, and it still was a failure. It still hurt me in the end. And so it's a very emotional response from these people. They don't really know how to, they can't really properly process this. I mean, they're seeing, they're hearing lies from their own community that this never happens, that,
you know, Chloe, it's like it's funny how leftists will go on about how they say like, oh, you should be proud who you are, you should love people, who you are, respect one another, but
right,
then yet they're telling kids at a young age that or actually if you feel like being a boy and if you're not happy about your gender, you will commit suicide and you will pretty much be unhappy about yourself. See the double standard there? It's absolutely ridiculous.
right. It's all about self-love until it comes to gender. If
Exactly, it is. Mhm.
if you feel any dissonance with your body, it's because of your gender. Your body is the thing that's wrong and not your mind, and you need to change your body to reflect what's inside your head. And
Yep, that's definitely true.
if that ends up being a mistake, then it's on you.
Hmm. I like how you're being really serious there. It's a good thing that you're being serious about that. Because a lot of people, I just think about a lot of these kids because, Chloe, I saw another thing on Twitter the other day that someone was recommending that kids, actually know that they're trans at 4 and 6 years old. And I was like, what?
Yeah, I that makes me think of like my little cousins. I mean, at 4, they couldn't even get their pronouns right. Like they would refer to, say, like when they would talk about my dad or my uncle, they would say she. They would they would use she to refer to everything, even inanimate objects.
Mhm.
Kids just don't understand things like that at that age. And if you ask them what makes a boy different from a girl, they'll talk about things like hair or dresses or makeup or pants. It's all based on stereotypes.
It's
And it's the
it's
same as
just
this.
all this mental abuse that these far left people are doing, the trans activists. It's just child abuse. It's just horrible. It's not
Right.
civilized. I mean, what society allows this stuff? Honestly, like what civilization allow this stuff? It's just absolutely insane what is going on. Chloe. And Chloe, I think for you to come out and talk about this, you are very brave. You are very brave. I think it's awesome that you're exposing this evil. And I think the amount of hate that you were getting it's ridiculous because no kid should be getting put on hormone like these pills that literally are used, for rapists, that are literally used for pedophiles to chemically de-stress them. I think it was in World War II or something like that. It's just like, what are we
Not too
doing in
long
the
ago,
West?
actually.
Yeah, it is true. It's just absolutely go ahead, like you're saying.
They stopped using those treatments in sex offenders actually because they were deemed to be too cruel. And
But they're giving
if
them to
these
kids now, right?
treatments,
But they're
right,
giving them
right,
to
if
kids.
these treatments are
Oh,
too cruel and used for people who have committed sexual offenses, then why are we using them on kids?
it's the satanic agenda, like they say, the New World Order policy. The transgenders, and they're trying to push on people. And it's like, and look, to be honest, Chloe, there's a lot of good transgender people who are
Right.
against this, thing, like Blair White. There's also, I saw that you have a friend. What's his name? He starts with A. You have a friend.
Um.
There's also another girl that I saw that's just come out that's just recently spoke against it. And there's a lot of
Mm,
gay people. For example, the Gays Against Groomers. They do a great job. There's even a community called Trans Against against this whole stuff. It's just absolutely screwed up. Like, and it's just I don't understand what is happening to our world, Chloe. What is going on at the moment. Chloe, I also saw that you did a speech where you had Marjorie Taylor Greene next to you. So it was a case about. Can you tell us more about that? Like, what was that about? Like, and it was also, remember, Marjorie Taylor Greene like wanted to sign executive, like bring in a type of rule that was to ban this stuff, right? Is that correct?
yeah. So that was in around August of last year, I think, when I was in Washington D.C. and I was in front of the U.S. Capitol, and I had a press conference with Marjorie Taylor Greene. And right now, she's proposing a piece of legislation federally that will outlaw this practice in children. And I spoke on my experience and the importance of these laws being passed.
Oh, absolutely, they need to be passed. Like, one thing is, so Chloe, I used to be a fan of Donald Trump. I'm not a fan of Donald Trump because I'm a
Mm,
libertarian, but that's some other things. I really, whoever it is, even if it's Ron DeSantis, even if it's Trump, or even if it's a libertarian candidate, like whatever, I really think, that these presidents need to come on and say, right, enough's enough. This surgery's crap. It's not good. We shouldn't be giving this to kids. It's okay if you're 18 and want to get it, but to give it to kids, it's wrong. It's unacceptable. I'm signing an executive order to ban it nationwide. And if anybody performs this, for any doctor performs it on kids, they will be arrested and put to jail. That's what it should be, because it's just insane, man.
right. It
Honestly.
should be that way, but the Biden administration right now is going full force with this. They're
Oh,
promoting
he is.
this.
Well, back in the day, he wasn't a huge fan of homosexuality. He was saying, like, that he was against it. He was against transgender. Of course, he's just an actor. He's just a puppet. He's controlled by the bankers, the elitists, and and they're just pretty much, telling him to do this. Did you see, Chloe? Did you see
And he
this
can hardly
morning?
do his job.
I know, I know. Chloe, did you see this morning? He was in Ireland and he said that, like, he said that we should take over the world if all countries can work together, we can take over the world by licking it. And I was like, what?
By what?
There's licking it. He said, we yeah, and Chloe, it was pretty funny because there were some people, like you heard about the Dalai Lama kissing that baby's tongue. You heard about that, which is disgusting, right? There were some people like putting a meme up of like Biden like licking an ice cream, the Dalai Lama. I was like on the comments, and I was like, Jesus.
The fact that this guy is in office, though, that he got elected, like, this has to be elder abuse, because he does not have the mental faculties to be able to
Oh, he doesn't.
take
Absolutely
upon
not. I mean,
a whole presidency.
I know he
And it
doesn't. I mean,
shows.
and also, he's not doing anything to stop me. He keeps funding the war in Ukraine. Like, I'm not a fan of President Zelensky. I think he's a war criminal. I think the fact that he's not addressing the the East Palestine Ohio issue, which is absolutely worse. Which you probably hear, Chloe, that 6 like workers that just went there to check it out have gotten sick. It's just wow. And the Hunter Biden case is just absolutely ridiculous. But like you were saying, I think it's really good, that there is an executive order that is being signed, by Marjorie Taylor Greene to go. Look, so Chloe, just to I'm not a fan of Marjorie Taylor Greene. Just to let you know, that's just my opinion. You can respect. Sorry about that. I just don't want to cause any conflict. But that's good she's doing. And there's also other people too. I heard that there was another guy that also wants to put a ban on it too, and I think that's great. How is that lawsuit going? Is she managing Marjorie Taylor Greene to get anywhere near it, or has nothing been done?
No, Marjorie Taylor Greene doesn't have anything to. Wait, are you talking about my lawsuit?
No, that lawsuit, the case she's trying to bring in.
Which one?
The one where she's trying to put in the legislate to ban this stuff, where the one you were doing your speech in?
I'm not exactly sure, actually.
The one where you were on the Capitol and Marjorie Taylor Greene was there. We were just talking about that right now.
Are you talking about the legislation she was proposing?
Yeah, the legislation she wrote.
I see.
Any luck with that?
I honestly don't think that under this administration it's going to pass right now, but I find it really promising that these bills are at the very least being proposed, because it's taken far too long to get this issue to light.
It absolutely has, and
Chloe, especially the legislators.
It is, and it's really what's really messed up is when there's a map on that I saw on the internet website on Twitter where it says that like gender clinics from like United States in 2007 there was only like one gender clinic in 2007, and now in the United States there's like like 1,000 of them. There's like so many of them, and in Britain I actually heard that they're putting in a ban to ban this type of stuff recently. But why is it that they're not banning in the United States? It should be banned. Chloe, also speaking of that, I also saw that in Tucker Carlson you were talking about a lawsuit. What was that lawsuit about? And can you give us more details?
Yeah, so I am working with Harmeet Dillon of Center for American Liberty to sue Kaiser Permanente, which is my healthcare provider and insurance provider, and the hospital where I underwent the double mastectomy, and the surgeon who did it, the gender specialist who referred me to surgery, as well as the endocrinologist who put me on hormones. And we recently filed it, but I can't really give any updates right now because we haven't had any proceedings yet.
I really hope it goes well for you. I really hope you succeed in that court case, because it's just, absolutely ridiculous. How did you feel about, like, Chloe, how do you feel like, when you go on to like Tucker Carlson and like Jordan Peterson, like, how did you feel about going on to these big people to talk about it? And like, what would you say out of all the interviews you did, what was your favorite interview, and what was the one question they asked you that really hit you emotionally?
I think the top contender has to be Jordan Peterson. I I don't usually I don't usually cry while giving my testimony or during interviews, but it was like talking to Jordan was like it was almost like I was speaking to like almost a grandfatherly figure, a therapist and a teacher all in one. And so he kind of just in speaking to him, it kind of like having him like explain. I learned some things about myself through him. He explained where some parts of my gender dysphoria and my psych came from, and it kind of helped to break down the barriers that I usually hold during these interviews. And I actually started to cry about one of the complications that I'm having from these treatments with him. But he was it was an amazing experience, and it happened very unexpectedly. Actually, it one of his producer reached out just a few days before Christmas, so it was on a it was it came up very unexpectedly, and it was on a very it was on an odd schedule, but I'm very thankful that I was able to speak to him. But yeah, this is when I started speaking out. This doing what I'm doing now wasn't exactly what I had envisioned for myself, what I had in mind for the beginning to my adulthood. But it's been an awesome ride, and I'm really thankful that I'm able to do this.
Mm-hmm. What would you say, like, when it comes to Jordan Peterson? What would you say was your favorite, interview that he's done with anybody, and like his favorite, philosophical belief that he has that really motivates you to keep going on?
Sorry, could you rephrase that?
What was your favorite quote that Jordan Peterson's done and said, and like, what is your favorite like interview that you've seen from him that he's done with like someone on like on the whole transgender issue, the one that like really you really enjoy watching?
Um, I mean, admittedly, I haven't. It's kind of that is kind of a difficult question. It might be it might be a selfish answer, but it might be my own just because it
That's
was
okay. No
my
worries.
own experience, and I got to speak to him personally. But I couldn't really. I think one of my favorite quotes from him actually would be that these are butchers, not doctors that we are dealing with. Because it's absolutely true.
Yeah, that is true. I remember him, talking about that with you, and that was, And Chloe, when you were like crying, did you not want to cry when you were on the show, Jordan Peterson?
I mean, it was something that I actually anticipated a little bit just because of the nature of the interview. Like I knew it wasn't going to be a traditional interview, and that some new topics were going to come up, and that it was going to be naturally it was going to be very vulnerable just because it was between me and a psychologist. But I just I don't really like the feeling of crying in front of other people, but I think it's important to have these vulnerable moments because I don't. This is something that I'm still affected with. I'm still affected by in my day to day.
And Chloe, it's okay if you were to go on his show and cry because it's a good thing because it shows that you care, about like a lot of people, who have to go through the stuff, and you're very brave. And don't worry about it, Chloe. It's all good that you went on there. Like Chloe, look, on my podcast, I cried one time because I was talking about something in my personal life when I went through it. And look, if you went online and cried, it's all good. It doesn't matter. You're sharing the story. And I think what happened to for you to be taken advantage of by these butchers, like you mentioned, is just horrible. And you did a very brave thing. You're helping out. Think of this, Chloe. You're helping out all of those, people who changed their gender at a young age and got taken advantage of this. And it's fine. Like, if you want to go on, if you're feeling stressed out, like I know society will tell us, that men shouldn't cry and women shouldn't cry, but eventually we all need, to let out some steam and cry. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, dude, sometimes Jordan Peterson cries, even though he's a very knowledgeable guy. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So, Chloe, out of all the stories that out of all the people that have spoken to you, what would you say, like, out of all, like, the people who regretted, changing their gender, what would you say is, like, the one person who came up to you and said, thank you, for sharing this story? Like, I'm too afraid to come out and share my own. What would you say is the one story that, like, touched you the most, where someone like thanked you, for pretty much telling you? And what would you say is the craziest, story you've heard of, like, someone changing their gender at a young age?
Yeah, from the very beginning, I've had a lot of people reaching out to me about their own personal experiences. And at first, it was pretty much all parents. It was a lot of mothers, some fathers, and some other guardian figures of children and adolescents who, out of the blue, started identifying as transgender. And oftentimes these parents were they were losing their kids, either because their kids were pushing them away, or there were times when they'd even lost custody of their own children.
Mm-hmm.
And these stories are all heartbreaking, but eventually I started to hear from other kids actually who were in my situation. And on one hand, it was amazing that they felt like they finally had somebody who they could relate to and to speak to on this topic. But at the same time, it broke my heart just knowing that there's other girls and boys who transitioned as a kid like I did, and that they had to go through similar experience as mine, because really nobody. This isn't something that I wish on my worst enemy. But a few months ago, one of the people who reached out to me as a minor, her story was actually one of the most similar ones to mine that I've heard so far. She started transitioning socially at, I think, 12, and she was put on testosterone at the same age, and at 13 was when she had her breast removed.
That's disgusting.
She was younger than I was.
That's absolutely disgusting to get your breasts removed at a young age like that. And like you're saying, go ahead.
But this one especially hit close to home because she actually had some of the same doctors that I do.
Oh, wow. That
And
is insane.
right.
Mhm.
And she doesn't live too far away from me. And it was just about a month ago actually that she started speaking out publicly. Her name's Layla Jane, and she has a lawsuit with my same attorney.
Chloe, I think it's really cool that you're having parents come out to you and saying, thank you for, like, protecting us, thank you for protecting our kids, for warning about us, because man, I just look at the 21st century and it's just like the way it's going for any society to allow this is just messed up. And I think it's so good there's people like you speaking out against this. And I think for the parents, to say thank you for that is a good thing, because it's showing you're protecting young children. It's like that they say, for instance, that it's you can't I mean, absolutely messed up that they'll allow a society, where they'll have this transgender surgery that harms kids. It's fucked. It's fucked. Mhm. So, Chloe, how do you think, in a way, do you see this ending? Do you think, like, our society, especially in America, especially with the way it's going, like some people are saying, that it's becoming more wet, like it's becoming more liberal. Some people are saying that the American empire is over. Some people are saying it might wake up or something. when you look at like similar cases like of like Rosie Parker getting attacked in New Zealand, which was disgusting, and when you see it like similar situations of Billboard Chris and like also that sportswoman girl, the one that just got attacked in the school who was in the liberal campus and stuff.
Riley
How do
Gaines.
you see this going? Do you think like there's going to be an awakening where people just get fed up, or do you think we're going to be dealing for at least another 10 years of this craziness?
Yeah, I mean, some people think that this is going to take a decade or more to fight, but personally, I think that this isn't going to stand for very long. I think that it'll take maybe around 5 years, if even that, to fight this. And I think that childhood transition is going to be one of the first parts of gender ideology to go.
Yeah,
Because the reality
absolutely.
is that most people oppose this. It's not a partisan issue. It's not just a Republicans versus Democrats issue. People from all different walks of life and beliefs believe that this is wrong. Because it
Absolutely. There,
is.
there are there are liberals, there are progressives, there are anarchists who believe this is wrong, libertarians, many people, like because the misconception that the conservatives do, the one thing that a lot of the conservatives do, not all, but some conservatives seem to blame it a lot on the left when they seem to ignore the fact that like there are liberals who are against it, but that's an echo chamber that pretty much people need to get over. But I agree with you, and I think that people need to wake up, and I think that what an USA needs to be like is they need to be like Russia and like Russia and a lot of those Eastern European countries are against this gender affirming surgery thing. They're against it, and I think America should be against it too. I really think that no kids, no society should be allowing that stuff. Chloe, also speaking of that, what is your opinion on the transgender shooter that that where did that happen again? Sorry, I forgot.
This is in Tennessee.
Tennessee, the one that happened
After
in
a bill
Tennessee
was passed.
after the bill. Like, what was your opinion on like the transgender shooter that went in and like to the Christian school and killed a lot of those kids? And like, what is your opinion on like these like the people like saying that for example there was one priest saying that that person who did the shooting, which was disgusting and unacceptable to kill kids. I mean child kids getting killed in that shooting, which is fucking messed up and never should have happened. What is your opinion like on the priest coming out and saying like oh the transgender person getting treated is just like Jesus getting crucified and it's worse than those babies getting shot? What is your opinion on like all these transgender terrorists, the transgender activists that we're seeing where people are saying of transgender terrorism that is rising, seeming to be?
Right. So a lot of the people are making this out to either be an issue having to do with gun control or transgenderism. But I think,
Oh, it's not. It's mental illness. It's mental
right, it's
illness.
absolutely mental illness. This
Yeah.
person had obviously this person had some serious mental health comorbidities that were being completely dismissed in favor of their gender identity. And we still don't know whether they were on treatments like puberty blockers or testosterone, or whether they had any surgeries, whether they were even medically transitioning at all. But we do know that they were on SSRIs, which a lot of these shooters are being placed on antidepressants.
Oh yes,
And they are
antidepressants.
powerful, awful drugs. I mean, I know a lot of people from school and even in my family who were put on these to treat their mental health issues, and they become
Oh, you
worse.
should. They're like so. How I look at antidepressants, Chloe, antidepressants can be good for a small case, but like the problem is with antidepressants is now a lot of these pharmaceutical industries are basing them off science, which is very old. And when that happens, it's seeming to be that they're giving, like for example, people on schizophrenia, people with mental illness, like a bipolar, these drugs, and it just shows, that people should not be on these antidepressants long term. There's
Right.
nothing, they don't work long term, they're shit long term. All these medical industries are doing, is giving these people drugs, that just poison the mind. And it's just such a shame. And going back
Right.
to
And
that,
I
good, yeah.
I actually was on antidepressants and testosterone at the same time. I wasn't on SSRIs, but I was on Wellbutrin, which is used off label as an antidepressant, but it was originally for helping people with addictions. And I was also put on various ADHD medications, both short release and long release, and I was constantly switched between doses and medications. And I was on this slew of drugs, and it seriously worsened my mental health, and none of them addressed any of the underlying issues that I had. But they made me very irritable and made it very difficult for me to regulate myself emotionally and to socialize. But that being said, testosterone and these other psychiatric drugs that I was on didn't give me violent impulses quite like the shooter, or
Yeah.
at all really. I think that the bigger problem was that the shooter is was victim to an ideology that told them that they are part of an oppressed group that whose very existence is being threatened by conservatives, by
Yeah,
Christians,
the
and that they
myth
should
of
do
like
anything at any cost
the
to
myth
stop
of
the
the
genocide that they're a victim
trans.
of.
Yeah, they say it's the myth trans genocide. That's what they're saying because like there was a poster that came up the next day after that shooting, like where it said, I think Revengeance for Trans Day, and it said like, oh, we're being exterminated, like, and it's also trans genocide, which is not true. It's not happening in the West. That's a load of
No.
rubbish.
The genocide they speak of is their own suicides.
Yep, that's true. That is a genocide that is happening right now, especially. Mhm.
They say that these suicides are a result of not being properly cared for, not getting the treatment that they think they need, which is hormones, cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, and surgeries to remove the primary and secondary sex characteristics. And they also attribute it to a lack of acceptance. But clearly none of that's true. I mean, I can't think of a single other group that is being talked about more right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I remember, you were saying, like in one of your interviews, I think it was to Tulsi Gabbard, you were saying, that the transgender community seems to be the most talked about group in the world and seems to, like the Western media seems to portray, it as the most oppressed group in the world, when there are other groups that are far more oppressed than they are.
Right.
Mhm. So,
For an oppressed
Chloe,
group, they're sure getting a lot of attention.
mhm. Oh, absolutely. It is pretty insane what is going on. So, Chloe, with the shooter, right? How do you think, do you see that going, like with the in the future of that? Like, do you think we're going to get the manifesto coming out about that shooter? And like, how does it make you feel how they haven't released like the manifesto of that shooter yet?
Right. I mean, we know that they had a manifesto, but for some reason, it just hasn't been released yet. But we've seen receipts from some private messages between the shooter and an old friend of theirs who was an ally to them before they committed the shooting and then killed themselves.
Yeah, that's not very good, isn't it? So,
But it
and
gets
also, mhm.
from those receipts, though, what little of it that we have, we can see just what mindset they were in. I mean, they truly do believe that they were part of a genocide and that there are children out there who really need these treatments who won't be able to get them and will die from neglect.
So speaking of that, Chloe, is there anything else you would like to say before we finish the interview? Because it's up to the hour mark.
Um, I think a message that I would have for parents and families who are dealing with this with their own children it's important to let them know that it's not going to be easy, and oftentimes you might have to go against the advice of your own doctors and your children's therapists, because many doctors right now are pushing transition as the only means of treating gender dysphoria in kids and young adults, but it's not, and more often than not it causes more problems than it solves. And a problem that I had and that I noticed with a lot of other trans identified young adults and girls and boys that I was friends with was that they often came from broken homes, that they were often, many of them had a history of childhood sexual abuse and neglect and physical abuse. And many of them didn't really feel like they had a place to belong to. They were often bullied at school. Many of them weren't active in any clubs or sports or extracurriculars at all. But that's exactly what they need. They need a place where they can interact with their peers and work on something and have a goal to work towards.
Fair enough. That's a very good, like you're saying.
Right. And
You're right, Chloe.
they often turn to the internet because that is exactly what they're missing. And they find it on the internet. It's very easy now to find a community where you can easily interact and relate to other people. And the trans community for many kids is often where they find that. And it makes its way into some of the most unexpected places. Like for me, it didn't start in the trans community. It started in fandoms. So it's important to, I think the most important thing to do, one of the most important things that parents should do to prevent this from happening to their kids or to stop it from festering is to make sure that they are making friends with their peers and active in their communities in real life, and that if they are using technology, that they aren't spending too much time on it, and to monitor what they're being exposed to, who they're interacting with, and ideally not allowing technology exposure at all until late teenhood, like around age 16.
That's a good idea.
Because really, I think
personally,
maybe
I
it's
think
kind of an extreme stance I hold, just because I didn't really have my internet usage wasn't really monitored, and I had pretty much unrestricted internet access from a very young age. But I really just don't think the internet is appropriate at all for a developing mind.
absolutely not. Personally, I think maybe kids should go on the internet when they're 18 or 16, depending on how they look at it. But but you know what, Chloe? Just want to say, actually, before we end this conversation, I just want to say you are so brave for coming out and speaking out against this just insanity that is going on. All these speeches you do, especially, how you're telling, your story, how the horrible experiences that you had that no 12-year-old should go through. Absolutely no 13-year-old should go through. And I think it's so brave how you've gone on Jordan Peterson or Tucker Carlson's show, and you're showing, you're telling the story about this craziness. And Chloe, if I was a father, if I was a dad, and I had like a kid, and I saw this shit going on, I wouldn't want my kid to go to a public school, because it's people like you, people like Blair White, and people like other trans activists, true and trans activists, who are speaking out against this, who really really, woke my mind up and woke everybody's mind up. And I think what you're doing is great. You should keep going. Never give up. Don't listen to what these stupid haters, tell you online that, oh, you're a traitor to trans people, because you're not, because you're protecting them a lot from this insaneness that's going on. And I really hope whoever the president is next, they ban this gender changing surgery stuff. It's wrong. It's
Absolutely.
not nice. It's ungodly. It's unspiritual. Enough's enough. Like, look, here's the thing. When a person turns 18, that's fair enough. That's different. When they're 18, they can do whatever they want. They're an adult. But if it's a young kid, they should not be pushing this shit on kids. It's wrong. It's unacceptable. And I think it's fantastic that you're speaking out against it. You're a very brave soul. And you're doing one of God's work, Chloe.
Thank you so much.
You
It
know,
was a pleasure speaking to you.
thank you very much, Chloe. Where can people find you, Chloe?
Yeah, so I'm active on Twitter and Instagram at CHOOOCOLE. That's three O's in the middle.
Right. Thank you for coming on, Chloe. It was a pleasure having you. God bless you. And I just want to say to everybody, thank you for joining the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 105. Please remember, everybody, to never give up. Please go and give Chloe Cole a follow. She's absolutely fantastic, speaker. She does a great job exposing this insanity that's going on. She's great interviews. You really will enjoy her. And please go and support her work. And thank you for everybody for joining the Welsh Republic podcast, episode 105. Please like and subscribe. Comment if you want. God bless you all. Take care.